John F. Kennedy was handed a letter that morning that was never supposed to leave that office. But the senator who wrote it had no idea Kennedy had already made his decision before Sunrise, Washington, District of Columbia, March 4, and a young black lawyer named Calvin Marsh was about to find out that one man had been fighting for him in rooms he was never allowed to enter. If you believe real power is quiet, subscribe so these untold stories find you. Washington, District of Columbia, March 4th, 1961, 7 minutes before 8 in the morning. The Oval Office was cold the way the White House was always cold in early March. A dry radiator heat that never quite reached the windows, and the light coming through the south, facing glass, was the pale kind that made everything look like it was still deciding whether to be a real day or not. The president had been at his desk since 6 in the morning, which was not unusual, and which his personal secretary, Evelyn Lincoln, had long since stopped remarking on, because remarking on it had never once changed it. There was a single folder open on the desk in front of him. Inside it was a 2-page personnel recommendation he had read 4 times. The name at the top of the first page was Calvin James Marsh. Calvin James Marsh was 29 years old. He had grown up in Birmingham, Alabama, in a house on a street where the sidewalks ended 2 blocks before the white neighborhoods began, and did not start again until 2 blocks after. His father had worked at a steel mill for 31 years and had never once been considered for a supervisory position, despite being the man 3 different white supervisors had come to when the machinery broke down, and they did not know how to fix it. His mother had taught 4th grade at a colored school that shared its textbooks with a white school across town, receiving them only after the white school had decided they were too worn to keep using. Calvin had learned to read from books with pages missing. He had not known this was unusual until he was 14 years old and walked into a public library for the first time and understood what a complete book felt like in his hands. He had graduated valedictorian from his high school in 1950. He had applied to the University of Alabama and received a letter back that did not address him by name. He had attended Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia, on a partial scholarship, working nights at a hotel on Peachtree Street to cover the rest, and had graduated in 1954 with a degree in political science and a grade point average that his professor had described in a letter of recommendation as the strongest he had produced in 22 years of teaching. He had gone on to Howard University School of Law in Washington, District of Columbia, graduating 2nd in his class in 1957. He had spent the following 3 years working at a small civil rights law firm on U Street Northwest, taking cases that did not pay and winning more of them than anyone had expected him to. His name had come across the desk of Harris Wofford, one of the president's key advisors on civil rights. In November of 1960, 2 weeks after the election, Wofford had flagged it. The president had read the file. He had asked 2 questions. The first question was whether the work was as strong as the file suggested. Wofford had told him it was stronger. The second question was whether there would be resistance. Wofford had told him there would be. The president had nodded once and said to move forward with the recommendation. The letter on his desk that morning had arrived the previous evening through a back channel, delivered not through official correspondence, but through a mutual aide who had placed it on the desk with the careful positioning of a man who wanted it noticed, but did not want to be the one who had brought it. It was from Senator Harold Bryce of Georgia, 67 years old, 4th-term senator, a man who had served on the Judiciary Committee for 14 years and who had, in those 14 years, developed a method of opposition that never raised its voice and never left fingerprints. The letter was 3 paragraphs long. The first paragraph expressed Senator Harold Bryce's deep respect for the president's commitment to assembling a qualified team. The second paragraph raised what it called measured concerns about the readiness of certain candidates for high-visibility federal positions, citing unnamed sources within the legal community who had expressed reservations about temperament and experience. The third paragraph suggested, with the particular warmth of a man who knows he is threatening you, that the president might consider whether the timing was right for such an appointment, given the current political climate and the relationships that needed to be maintained on the Hill. The president had read the letter the previous evening. He had read it again that morning. He had set it on the right side of his desk, which was where he put things he had already decided about. Evelyn Lincoln knocked twice at 7:58 and opened the door. The man behind her was Robert Francis Kennedy, the Attorney General of the United States, 35 years old, in a dark suit with his tie slightly off, center in the way it always was before 9 in the morning. He had the file under his arm. He sat down across from the president without being asked, because he never waited to be asked, and he opened the file and looked at his brother across the desk. The appointment was on the table. There had been pushback. Robert Francis Kennedy said this without inflection, because inflection would have implied it was news, and it was not news. The president looked at the file. He looked at Senator Harold Bryce's letter on the right side of the desk. He looked at his brother. He said one sentence. He said, "The papers were signed this morning at 60:47. Robert Francis Kennedy looked at him for a moment. Then he closed the file. He said nothing, because nothing needed to be said, and because the Kennedy brothers had, over the course of their entire lives together, developed an economy of language in rooms where the stakes were high that other men spent careers trying to learn and never quite did. The appointment was processed through the Department of Justice that afternoon. Calvin James Marsh received a phone call at 4:23 in the afternoon at the offices of the law firm on U Street Northwest, where he had spent the previous 3 years working cases that did not pay. The woman who called identified herself as a representative of the Office of the Attorney General of the United States. She asked if he was available to come in the following Monday morning. Calvin James Marsh sat down in his chair with the phone in his hand and looked at the wall of his office, which had on it a photograph of his father standing outside the steel mill in his work clothes, taken on the day he had retired in 1958. He looked at it for a long time after the call ended. Calvin James Marsh reported to the Department of Justice on Monday, March 6, 1961. He was the youngest person in his division and one of the first black attorneys appointed to a federal position of that level in the history of that department. He served for 4 years. He argued cases that established precedents still cited in federal courts today. Senator Harold Bryce never publicly acknowledged the letter he had written. The aide who had delivered it left Washington, District of Columbia in the summer of 1961 and did not return to political work. Harris Wofford, who had first flagged Calvin James Marsh's name, went on to become one of the architects of the Peace Corps and later served as a United States Senator from Pennsylvania. Robert Francis Kennedy, who had sat across that desk and closed that file without a word, would himself be gone 7 years later, in June of 1968, in a hotel kitchen in Los Angeles, California. The president who had signed those papers at 6:47 in the morning would be gone before the end of that same year. On a Friday afternoon in Dallas, Texas, in November of 1963, Calvin James Marsh attended both funerals. He stood in both lines. He said nothing at either one that he had not already said privately, in his own way, in the years between. On the wall of his office for the rest of his career, he kept 2 things: the photograph of his father outside the steel mill, and a single sheet of paper, framed simply, on which was typed the date March 4, 1961, and the time 6:47 in the morning, and nothing else. He never explained it to anyone who asked. He never needed to. If this story reached something in you about what it means for one man to make a decision in a quiet room before the world wakes up, take a moment right now and subscribe so these untold stories find you every single week. There are names that history recorded and names it did not, and the ones it did not are sometimes the ones that mattered most to the people who were there. Tap the thumbs up if you believe that real power does not announce itself. ring the bell so the next story comes to you the moment it is ready. And tell us in the comments, who is the person in your life who made a decision for you in a room you were never in? We read every single one.